Hello, let me tell you an unusual story, one you've probably never heard. It was April 2009. The cruise ship was heading toward the Red Sea. Everything seemed normal, but I had a bad feeling. And soon I understood. It wasn't without reason. The ocean stretched before the liner like polished glass under a dark sky, speckled with sparse stars that glimmered like distant beacons in the night. Not a whisper of wind, not a single wave, only the soft, almost soothing hum of the MSC Melody's engines hinted at the movement of this floating city, its outlines barely discernible in the darkness. The ship glided through the night waters of the Indian Ocean, 300 miles from the Seychelles, where palm trees on the horizon appeared as ghostly silhouettes, following a route from Durban to Genoa via the Red Sea and Suez Canal. Moonlight reflected on the water, creating an illusion of an endless mirror, broken only by the occasional splash of fish, while the faint scent of salt mingled with the smell of machine oil lingering in the air. On the bridge, surrounded by flickering instruments and maps secured with metal clips, stood Captain Federico Bellini, a tall man with graying black hair, his sharp gaze revealing 30 years at sea. His hands, wrinkled and marked by salt, gripped the wheel with confidence, as if he felt every breath of the ship, every tremble of its hull. Beside him, Luis Armendez, a young Spaniard with light stubble and a nervous habit of fidgeting with a pencil, leaned over the radar, squinting at faint blips on the screen. His fingers trembled slightly. His first voyage in these dangerous waters was proving challenging, and he glanced at the captain repeatedly, seeking reassurance. "Too quiet," Bellini murmured, his voice low with a gentle Italian accent, softening each word. "In these waters, silence is deceptive. Remember last year, Luis? The storm came without warning, and we barely held course off the Cape of Good Hope." "Yes, sir," Luis nodded, his voice faltering as his eyes darted to the screen. "But the radar's clear. Fishermen, maybe? I saw their nets off Mozambique last week." "Possibly," Bellini replied, but his eyes narrowed and his fingers tightened on the wheel. "But log it. Keep watch. Tanya, what do you think? Your intuition hasn't failed us yet." Tanya Curtis, the third officer, a Brit with short blonde hair and a scar on her cheek, a reminder of her service in the Royal Navy, lifted her head from the maps spread on the table. Her voice was firm, with a slight rasp. "Course is steady, but I'd reinforce the patrol." "These waters are restless, even in silence. Heard about an attack off Mombasa last month. Lost contact there." In the engine room, Chief Engineer André Casares, a stocky Portuguese with a perpetual smile, checked the pressure in the pipes, his hands moving with practiced skill. He whistled a fado tune, drowning out the hum of the machinery, his eyes tracking the gauge needles. Everything was on schedule, but he still glanced at the sensors, a habit honed over years when one mistake could cost lives. The cruise liner, 205 meters long and 27 meters wide, was a true city on water, its decks gleaming under moonlight. It housed 1,076 passengers in 532 cabins, ranging from simple to luxurious, with ocean views through large, salt-crusted portholes. The crew, 535 strong, worked like a Swiss clock, their voices echoing in the corridors above the sound of the waves. On board shone a spa with eucalyptus scents, a beauty salon with gold-framed mirrors, a cozy library with leather chairs smelling of old paper, and a medical center with white walls carrying the odor of iodine and fresh bandages. 2 pools, one under a glass magrodome roof where raindrops tapped, and an open one surrounded by faded lounge chairs, beckoned the guests. The jacuzzi bubbled with gentle warmth, the 42-square-meter gym hummed with runners' footsteps, and the children's play area, adorned with bright flags, rang with laughter. Live music played on the decks, saxophone melodies blending with the light clink of glasses raised in toasts. People dined under the starry sky, danced waltzes with echoing steps, photographed the sunset with their cameras, capturing the last rays. Children splashed in the pool with shrieks that carried over the water. Parents sipped mojitos, exchanging smiles and tales of past travels. In the library, two elderly men argued over a chessboard, their voices a duet of friendly rivalry, pieces falling with a dull thud. In the med center, a stewardess handed out a bandage with a joke, while someone complained of a sunburn, rubbing red skin. Everything seemed ordinary, like any resort hotel where time flowed slowly and carefree. But behind the resort's facade lay a different reality, steeped in tension. Armored communication lines hidden within the bridge's steel panels, emergency protocols memorized by every crew member, and a security team of Israeli contractors led by Itai Levin, a silent man with dark eyes, added an edge. Levin rarely appeared, his steps almost inaudible, but his team, Doron with a scar on his cheek from an old fight, Raphael with a constant cigarette whose smoke rose to the ceiling, and Miri Green, whose hands held a weapon with a dancer's grace, remained vigilant, patrolling corridors with radios in hand and the faint jingle of gear. Among the passengers stood out Jack Thompson, a former Marine turned logistics expert with broad shoulders and a gaze trained to notice the smallest details, even cracks in concrete, and his wife Emily, a doctor with gentle hands and a resolute voice, her eyes glowing with care. They were on their honeymoon with their niece Laura, a thin girl with curls who clutched a stuffed rabbit even in sleep. Jack, with a shadow of fatigue in his eyes, was accustomed to risk, recalling desert patrols. Emily to saving lives, her hands remembering thousands of bandages. Nearby was Patrick Fleming, an Irishman with a red beard, always facing the exit as if expecting danger from childhood tales. And Klaus Berger, a German engineer with a slight limp, strolling the deck with a notebook full of sketches he redrew each evening. In the bar on the fifth deck flitted Alina Storm, a security officer working undercover as a waitress. Her movements were precise, like a gymnast's, her gaze attentive with a faint shadow of the past hidden behind a smile. She knew pirates were common in these waters, and her fingers nervously gripped a tray as she wiped glasses, recalling tales of attacks off Somalia. Her story, of losing a friend on a ship off Africa where she couldn't help, added depth to her silence, making her silhouette mysterious in the bar's dim light. On the bridge, Bellini noticed a faint signal on the radar, a blip that appeared and vanished like a mirage, leaving a trace of unease. His heart beat faster, but his face remained impassive, masking decades of experience with calm. "Fisherman?" Luis asked, his voice trembling, eyes darting to the captain. "Possibly," Bellini replied, staring into the darkness beyond the window where shadows danced on the water. "But log it. Keep watch. Tanya, check southeast. Might be storm echoes." Jack stood on the deck, inhaling the salty air, his fingers gripping the cold, damp railing. Emily hugged him from behind, her warm breath brushing his neck, offering a moment of comfort. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice quivering with concern, hands squeezing his shoulders. "Just looking," he said, turning to her with a faint smile. "Sometimes silence says more than it should. Remember waiting out the storm in Norfolk? You laughed at my binoculars." "Yes," she smiled, her eyes gleaming. "You slept with them in hand." By midnight, the cruise liner slowed slightly, the engine's hum fading to a soft rustle, and the moon reflected on the water like a second sky stretching to the horizon. The silence felt thick, almost tangible, hinting at something ominous, and even the faint creak of the deck underfoot added tension. Night thickened over the Indian Ocean, enveloping the MSC Melody. In darkness, pierced only by the faint light of deck lanterns, their beams trembling in a light breeze. The liner held its course toward the Red Sea, April 25, 2009, its hull gently rocking on lazy waves, the scent of salt blending with the aroma of wood soaked in seawater. On the bridge, Bellini remained at his post, his fingers tapping the wheel, leaving sweat marks, his eyes fixed on the radar, where blips flickered like ghosts. Luis, with sweaty palms, adjusted the screen's brightness, muttering to himself, his breath uneven from nerves. "Luis, check southeast," Bellini said, his voice sharpening with a note of tension he tried to hide. "Those aren't fishermen. I recall a case off Yemen. 3 boats approached silently, and we lost contact for 2 hours." "Yes, sir," Luis replied, zooming in, his fingers trembling, eyes widening with fear. The blips on the screen moved with a rhythm too regular, like an enemy's heartbeat. "Alert security," the captain ordered. "Itai Levine, yellow alert. Tanya, contact Operation Atalanta. Let them know we've spotted suspicious movement." In the armory, Levin, with dark circles under his eyes, inspected water cannons and signal flares, his fingers gliding over cold metal with practiced ease. His team, Doron, whose scars told of battles, Raphael with a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, smoke spiraling upward, and Miri Green, whose curls escaped her helmet, prepared for the worst. Miri, with a slight tremble in her hands, whispered, "Not the first time, right? Remember how we barely escaped Mogadishu?" "No," Levin nodded, his voice steely, a shadow of the past flickering in his eyes. "But we're ready. Keep communication, and don't lose vigilance." On the 7th deck, Klaus Berger, leaning on his cane, spotted flashes on the horizon. Not stars, but short, sharp glints reflecting off the water like signals. He frowned, his notebook dropping to the deck with a thud, and hurried to the bridge, limping more than usual, his breath heavy with worry. In the bar, Alina Storm, wiping glasses, froze, her gaze fixed on the window where shadows moved beyond the glass. She recognized those signals. Pirates, and her heart raced, echoing the memory of her lost friend. Jack stepped onto the cabin balcony, his binoculars trembling in his hands, the cold wind stinging his face. Emily tucked Laura in, humming a lullaby, her voice quivering with exhaustion, fingers gently stroking the girl's hair. Laura clutched her rabbit, her eyes glistening with fear, whispering, "Mom, is it scary?" "Emily, gather documents and warm clothes," Jack said, his voice firm as a battlefield command. "Quickly, while I check the deck." "What's happening?" She turned, her hands pausing over the suitcase, eyes filling with alarm. "Saw flashes, not fishermen," he replied, recalling patrols in the Persian Gulf where he learned to spot danger in shadows. "We'll be ready, like in Iraq." 2347. Radar confirmed. 3 boats, their motors humming, closing within 5 miles, their silhouettes emerging through the fog. Bellini clenched his jaw, his fingers whitening on the wheel, forehead beating with sweat. "Distance?" he asked, leaning toward Luis, his voice tense. 5 miles. They'll close in 10 minutes, the assistant replied, his voice breaking, hands trembling more. "Increase speed. Itai. Red alert. Passengers to cabins. Tanya, send a distress signal," the captain ordered, his tone stern but calm. The alarm blared across the ship. "Crew, battle stations, passengers, stay in cabins. This is not a drill." The horn echoed off the bulkheads, quickening heartbeats, and passengers on the decks began whispering, grabbing bags and hugging children. Emily embraced Laura, her hands trembling, while Jack dashed to the stairs, his steps ringing on the metal. There, Raphael met him, cigarette smoldering in the dark, face tense. "I served. Can help," Jack said, gesturing to the radio, his eyes flashing with resolve. "Stairwell 6B, take a radio." "Code, David 38, Raphael replied, handing over the device, his voice hoarse from fatigue. The boats drew closer, their motors roaring over the waves. Automatic fire cracked, bullets striking the hull, shattering a stern spotlight, shards scattering across the deck. Security responded with water cannons, streams rising like white snakes, and signal flares illuminating the night with red light. Levin coordinated, his commands clear, avoiding unnecessary shots, his eyes tracking every shadow. Panic gripped the 6th deck, screams, running feet, The clink of broken glass and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. The pirates retreated after 15 minutes, one boat smoking, its silhouette vanishing in the fog, the others dissolving into darkness. Jack helped guide people away, his voice calming. "To cabins, quickly, it's under control," though his own heart pounded with adrenaline. "Maintain course," Bellini said over the radio, his tone weary but firm. "Vigilance until dawn, Luis. Keep the radar ready." Over the loudspeaker, "Danger past. Remain calm. Situation under control." But Jack, gazing at the dark horizon, knew this wasn't the end, his thoughts returning to Emily waiting in the cabin. The dawn of April the 26th painted the sky above the Seychelles in a soft pink, reflecting on the waves like an artist's brushstrokes, bathing the deck in gentle light. The MSC Melody continued its journey toward the Red Sea, its hull still trembling from the night's shock, the air thick with the scent of salt and metal. Passengers began emerging from their cabins, their faces pale, eyes wary, their steps uncertain on the slippery boards. Whispers spread through the corridors, mingling with the aroma of coffee from the buffet where stewards poured drinks with trembling hands. Bellini, with a mug of black coffee in hand, its steam rising to the ceiling, reviewed camera footage in the service room, lit by dim lamps. His fingers tapped the table, leaving damp marks as he studied a frame of a boat, moving into a blind spot at the stern, a shadow flickering behind the glass. The cameras missed that angle, troubling him, recalling an old incident off the Gulf of Aden. He summoned Levin, whose heavy steps echoed down the corridor like a drumbeat. "Compile a list of suspects," the captain said, pointing to the screen where frames froze like mute witnesses. Who acted oddly? Who was absent during the attack? I remember 2005. A passenger turned out to be a spy, found in the cargo hold. In the room gathered Bellini, Levin, engineer Casares, whose hands still smelled of oil, leaving marks on the table, Jack with tired eyes reflecting anxiety, and Klaus leaning on his cane, its tap resounding in the silence. The screen flashed images. The boat, a shadow at the stern, a hooded figure lurking in the dimness. "Someone might have boarded," Levin said, his voice cold as steel, his eyes narrowing. "The blind spot's perfect. Miri saw movement near the laundry, and I heard rustling there last night." "I noticed an open tool crate," Jack added, his fingers clenching into a fist, his voice trembling with military memories. "Pried open roughly, fresh marks on the metal. In the Army, we learned to spot such details, even the smell of rust." "Our people don't do that," Casares replied, his accent thickening, his hands pausing on his knees. "Tools are signed for, I checked yesterday before dinner. This is outsider work, and I can smell it in the oil." Bellini frowned, his gaze turning steely like the sea in a storm. "So, someone's on board, among us. Klaus, you're an engineer. What do you see? Your eyes notice more than mine." "Could have sabotaged the system," Klaus replied, flipping through his notebook, the ink smudged by dampness. "Cut bolts. Fuel leak? Possible. But why? I've seen such traces at Hamburg plants, professional work." Levin presented a list. A passenger with a fake badge, a disabled camera on the sixth deck with wires hanging like dead snakes, an opened crate. Among the names flashed Alina Storm, a new employee hired a day before the voyage. Her badge wouldn't scan, raising suspicion like a shadow in a mirror. "Who's Alina?" Bellini asked, leaning back in a creaking chair. "Works the bar," Levin said, crossing his arms, his fingers gripping a pen. "But her documents raise questions. Miri saw her checking ventilation, and I heard footsteps at night." "Check her," the captain ordered. "Quietly. If she's with the pirates, we need to know before they strike again." Emily sat with Laura in the cafe, her hand stroking the girl's hair as she flipped through a worn book. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but shadows of the ordeal lingered on their faces like yesterday's fear. Laura pressed close, her breath uneven. "Mom, are we safe?" she asked, her voice a whisper, her eyes glistening with tears. "Yes," Emily replied, hugging her, her voice trembling with care. "Jack's watching everything. He always protects us. Remember how he fixed the car last year in the rain?" In the cafe, Jack noticed a man with an upside-down book, thin, with dark eyes, nervously flipping pages, leaving sweat marks on his fingers. A scar on his hand, barely visible under his sleeve, hinted at a heavy past, and Jack overheard a steward call him Victor. He approached, his steps confident but tension building inside. "What are you reading?" he asked, tilting his head, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Hemingway." "The Old Man and the Sea," Victor replied with a slight accent, avoiding eye contact, his hands trembling more. Jack nodded, but unease stirred within, like before a fight. Too neutral, too calm. He returned to Emily, quietly saying, "Keep an eye on him. Something's off." In the tech room, Patrick Fleming, with red-rimmed eyes, inspected the ventilation, his fingers finding cut bolts on the cover, the metal cold and jagged like a fresh strike. "Not an accident," he muttered, pulling out a flashlight, its beam shaking in his hands. "Someone knew where to hit, and I can smell the rust." A radio message came. "MSC Melody, this is Frigate Marqués de Ensenada. Approaching from the north, 10 miles. Confirmed situation." The voice was clear, with a Spanish accent cutting through the wave noise. "Attack repelled," Bellini replied, his tone businesslike but weary. "Possible infiltration. Request inspection. Tanya, prepare data for transmission and tell them to hurry." The engine room hummed like the liner's massive heart, filling the air with the scent of hot oil and metal, its fumes mingling with dampness. Walls vibrated from turbine hum, and dim, flickering lights cast long shadows on the faces of those gathered in the cramped space. Here, in the ship's safest spot, passengers and crew turned the room into an improvised shelter, sitting on brought blankets edged with salt, exchanging anxious glances, heavy with fear. Emily, with a medical bag torn at the corners on her lap, sat beside Laura, her fingers deftly bandaging Stewardess Anna's arm, whose pallor contrasted with a red, oozing wound. Drops fell to the floor, leaving dark stains, and Emily whispered reassurance. "Hang on, Anna. It'll be okay soon. Remember when I taught you to bandage last trip, after you burned yourself with coffee?" "Thank you," Anna whispered, her voice trembling, eyes filling with tears. "I thought it was the end, and my kids would never see me again." Security guarded the entrances and vents, their silhouettes stark against rusted pipes, breaths heavy with tension. Levin, with a radio worn from use in hand, maintained order, his commands like hammer strikes. "Stay calm, everyone in place, kids to the walls, adults near the pipes." People were frightened, but discipline, honed over years, held them together, though whispers persisted. Emily noticed a girl in a waitress uniform, straight-backed, calm amid chaos. It was Alina Storm, standing by the wall with a strained smile. She wasn't frantic, her fingers nervously tugging at her sweat-soaked uniform, betraying inner tension. Emily approached, her steps echoing on the metal marked with footprints. "Are you okay?" she asked, meeting Alina's eyes where a flicker of worry danced. "Yes," Alina replied, her voice soft but steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "Just waiting for this to end. I've handled situations like this, but each feels like the first." "Where do you work?" Emily pressed, her doctor's instinct demanding more, heart racing. "Bar, Deck D," Alina said a bit too quickly, her gaze sliding toward the vent shaft. "But I'm used to being ready, even when coffee spills past the cups." Emily returned to Laura, but something didn't fit, like a puzzle missing a piece. The girl hugged her, her rabbit dropping with a soft thud, and Emily picked it up, her mind circling back to Alina, whose footsteps she'd heard at night. Klaus, with his cane in one hand and a trembling flashlight in the other, inspected the pipelines, their joints dusted with grime. His breath was labored as he spoke to a guard in a crumpled uniform. "If I wanted sabotage, I'd hit here. Access is hidden, but pipes are vulnerable. Saw this at Hamburg plants, nearly blew a boiler once. Over the radio. Contact with frigate in 40 minutes. Report anything suspicious." The voice echoed through the room, heightening tension, metal walls trembling with the sound. A metallic clang came from the vent, sharp as a hammer strike, echoing through the compartment, freezing everyone. Laura pressed into Emily, her breath hitching, eyes wide with fear. A guard raised his radio, voice cracking. "Movement in the shaft. Door on, check it, and be careful." Panic flared. People jumped up. Someone screamed, the sound bouncing off walls. Children clinging to parents. Levin ordered, "Calm down." Could be a rat, but hold positions. No panic yet. Emily saw Alina heading for the door, her steps too confident, too purposeful, like someone with a plan. Recalling her bar story, she shouted, "Stop her! She knows more than she's saying." Guards intercepted Alina at the door, her badge emitting a weak beep. She smiled, her eyes glinting like steel. "You're wasting time, but I don't mind." She was led to isolation, hands cuffed behind her, handcuffs clinking with each step. Levin began the interrogation, his voice stern as a command. "Who are you?" "Don't lie. I see it in your eyes." "Alina Storm, ship security, undercover," she replied, her tone unshaken, fingers clenching into fists. "Why stay silent?" Levin pressed, leaning closer, breath hot. "You could have warned us earlier." "My job was observation. I was checking vulnerabilities. Yesterday I found cut bolts on the cooling pipe. It was a bomb. I disarmed it with tools from the crate while you slept." Her voice was cold, but carried pride. Bellini arrived, his face grim as a storm sky. "Verify through channels. If this is a lie, she answers for every wounded," he said, eyes narrowing. 10 minutes later, the radio crackled. "Confirmed. Alina Storm, MSC Melody employee, crisis zone experience, worked undercover, her actions saved the ship." "You stay with us," Bellini said, his voice softening but firm. "Under supervision. Report every move." Later, Emily found Alina in the compartment, her shoulder bandaged, uniform soaked with sweat. "You saved us?" she asked, voice trembling with gratitude, hands shaking from exhaustion. "I did my job," Alina replied, avoiding eye contact, a shadow of pain flickering. "Thank you for stopping me. It sped things up. My friend would have died if I hadn't been careful, and I won't lose more." Dawn on April 26th bathed the ocean in soft gold, but the air remained heavy with tension, laced with gunpowder and salt. The liner was accelerating towards the Red Sea, its hull shuddering from the strain of the engines, the decks creaking beneath the crew's feet. The alarm blared again, sharp and piercing, quickening heartbeats, passengers huddling in cabins against the walls. 2 boats approached from the south, their silhouettes flickering on the horizon like predator shadows, motors humming through the fog. Jack ran to the east deck, his boots thudding on wet boards, leaving tracks, shoulder aching from yesterday's bruise, breath labored with adrenaline. He spotted Levin, his figure stark against the railing in morning light, and Raphael distributing radios with trembling hands. Salty wind lashed his face, hindering breath, carrying the sea's scent mixed with smoke. "Distance closing," Raphael said, his cigarette dropping to the deck with a hiss, voice quivering with strain. "Boats are fast, sir, and their course too straight." Over the loudspeaker, Bellini's voice trembled with fatigue, but held firm. "Passengers, stay in shelters. Crew to stations. This is a fight for life, not a game." The horn echoed over the water, amplifying unease, reverberating through corridors. Jack took position at the railing, hands gripping a sweat-slick radio. He helped direct water cannons, streams rising like white snakes, leaving rainbows in the sunlight. Pirates opened fire, bullets ricocheting off metal, one piercing the railing beside him, shards scattering. Security countered with signal flares, their red light tearing the sky, blinding attackers, air filling with gunpowder. "Hold the line," Levin shouted, his voice cutting through the noise, eyes flashing with resolve. "Doron, left side, don't let them flank. Miri, flares, aim sharper." One boat slowed, its motor coughing black smoke. The second tried to circle the stern, its silhouette darting through waves. Jack coordinated, radioing, "Left side, target at stern, Raphael, shift pressure, no delay." His voice shook but stayed commanding. The sky brightened, waves crashed against the hull, salty spray settling on his face. The boats began retreating, dissolving into fog, leaving a smoke trail. Jack wiped sweat from his brow, breath heavy, heart pounding. "They're pulling back," he said, lowering the radio, voice breaking with relief. "Not the end," Levin replied, eyes scanning the horizon where shadows still moved. "Frigate's not here yet, and I smell danger in this air." A radio voice came. "MSC Melody, this is Marqués de Ensenada. 20 minutes to contact. Hold on, we're at max speed." The voice was clear, Spanish accent slicing through wave noise. Jack nodded, thoughts with Emily and Laura, their faces from honeymoon dreams giving him strength despite exhaustion washing over him like a wave. Morning brought no peace, air thick with salt and shattered glass crunching underfoot like ice. The bar on the 7th deck was chaos. Windows broken, chairs overturned, floor covered with glittering shards reflecting morning light. Emily returned for a medical kit left in the rush, her steps echoing in silence, heart pounding with fear. At the door, she saw a boy, Samir, the one who played by the pool, with dark, tear-filled eyes and a dusty face. "Where's your mom?" she asked, kneeling beside him, voice soft as a mother's, hands trembling with concern. He pointed to the hall, fingers shaking, leaving marks on her sleeve. Suddenly, a pop. A bullet pierced the display, glass raining down with a melodic tinkle, and Emily shielded Samir under a table, heart in her throat. Shards cut her palm, leaving red streaks, but she stifled a cry, suppressing pain. Tomer, a guard, burst in, face slick with sweat, uniform torn at the shoulder, breath heavy. "All right?" he asked, raising a pistol, its metal gleaming in light. "Boy's scared," Emily replied, voice quivering, eyes welling. "I'll get him out. Help me. He's too young for this." Another shot. Glass shattered. Tomer staggered, a shard grazing his shoulder, blood dripping to the floor, mixing with glass like crimson on snow. Emily lunged, digging through her bag for a bandage, fingers shaking with haste. "Hold on," she said, wrapping the wound, voice firm despite fear. "Help's coming soon. Stay strong like in drills." Alina appeared at the door, uniform stained with blood and sweat, shoulder bandaged with cloth. "Shooting stopped. I traced a signal to the laundry. Someone's on board, and I hear their steps." Her voice was cold, eyes betraying worry laced with memories. "You're no waitress," Tomer grunted, wincing, face twisting with strain. "Doesn't matter now," Alina replied, helping Emily lift Samir, hands steady despite injury. "I'll take the boy. Emily, find the woman in the hall. She might be hurt. I saw her silhouette." Emily nodded, legs shaky, running as Alina's steps faded behind. Alina took Samir, fingers gripping his hand, eyes tracking shadows. Tomer covered, breath heavy like a wounded animal. Emily reached the hall, finding the woman, alive but in shock, sari torn, eyes vacant. She helped her up, supporting her elbow, feeling her tremble. At the stairs, Jack waited with Samir in his arms, face pale but resolute, hands trembling with fatigue. Alina stood nearby, gaze sweeping the horizon where shadows dissolved in fog. "Evacuation nearly done," Jack said, passing the boy to a steward whose eyes brimmed with tears. "Frigate's close. I saw its lights." On the horizon, Marqués de Ensenada emerged, its silhouette sharp as a beacon of hope, sun reflecting on the water like a mirror. The scent of salt mingled with smoke, air heavy as before a storm, saturated with burnt wood. Jack returned to the deck, shoulder aching from a bruise, each step pulsing with pain, breath ragged from exhaustion. He handed Samir to a steward whose hand shook, accepting the boy, his own fingers leaving sweat marks on the radio. The sun rose, painting the sea gold, but pirate boat shadows lingered in memory like ghosts. "His name's Samir. Find his mom. Let her know he's alive," he said, voice hoarse, eyes seeking salvation in the sky. Gunfire erupted at the stern, sharp cracks shattering silence, echoes rolling across the deck. One boat hadn't retreated, maneuvering through waves, its motor growling like a wounded beast, trailing smoke. Levin radioed, "Ammo running low. Water cannons hold, but pressure's dropping. We won't last long." Jack aided coordination, voice rising over the din, drowning out cries. "Left side, target at stern. Boost streams. Raphael, shift pressure. Don't let them near." His throat dried, but he persisted. Pirates fired, bullets whistling, one grazing the railing beside him, metal ringing like a bell. Security held, faces tense, sweat streaking foreheads leaving white lines. Water cannons raised a barrier, signal flares lit the sky, red light reflecting in their eyes. Over the loudspeaker, "Frigate in 18 minutes. Hold on, we don't give up." Bellini's voice trembled, but anchored like a storm anchor. In the engine room, Emily bandaged a wounded woman, fingers moving fast despite fatigue, breath uneven. Laura hugged her rabbit, eyes wide, whispering, "Mom, when will this end?" Alina brought water and a kit, movement slow but precise, injured shoulder twitching with pain. "You a medic?" Emily asked, wiping sweat, leaving a dirty streak. "No, but trained," Alina replied, voice soft as a whisper. "You're at your limit. Rest a minute. I'll take over." "Why are you here?" Emily pressed, gaze seeking truth. Alina looked at Laura, eyes darkening like a sea before a storm. "My friend vanished on a ship off Africa. I couldn't stand by. He was like a brother, and I swore not to let it happen again, even if it cost me sleep." Emily nodded, respect growing, warmth swelling in her chest. Alina rose, shoulder jerking, saying, "I'll hit the comms post. Need to signal the frigate. Stay here. Protect her." They exchanged a look, silent understanding, and Alina left, her steps fading into noise, leaving a trace of hope. Sounds for audio. Distant shots, turbine hum, shelter whispers, Alina's steps, metal creak, child's cry. Dawn bathed the ocean in soft light, waves sparkling like thousands of diamonds, reflecting the first sun rays. Jack stood at the railing, hand trembling from strain, wind tousling his hair, salty spray settling on his face. Aiton, a guard with a cheek scar, pointed to the horizon, voice quivering with hopeful fatigue. "Frigate," he said, eyes gleaming like tears of joy, fingers clutching the radio. The black silhouette of Marqués de Ensenada approached, its deck shining under the sun, flags fluttering in the wind. Cannon fire shook the air, warning shots into the water, raising fountains whose spray reached the liner. Pirates panicked, boats rocking, motors choking, cries carrying over the waves. "MSC Melody, this is Captain de la Fuente," the radio crackled, voice firm with a Spanish accent cutting through noise. "Confirm situation. Hold positions." "This is Jack," he replied, throat dry, voice breaking with emotion. "Attack repelled. Pirates retreating. Request medics. We have wounded. Their cries still echo." "Acknowledged. Green lights on starboard. Closing in. Prepare the wounded," the captain responded, tone resolute. Security picked up shards, faces dusted and sweaty, leaving white streaks, hands shaking from exhaustion. Jack knelt, breath heavy, thoughts returning to Emily, her honeymoon smile flashing in his mind. Her laugh gave him strength despite pain. In the shelter, Emily held Laura, hands trembling, fingers clutching the girl's rabbit. Frigate salvos echoed through bulkheads, floor vibrating, metal humming underfoot. "They're ours," she whispered, stroking Laura's hair, whose eyes glistened with fear. Medics from the frigate entered, steps resounding on metal, voices barking orders. Emily pointed to the wounded woman. "She needs help." And Stewardess Anna, her wounds deeper than it looks. She sat, hugging Laura, tears mixing with dust, leaving tracks on her cheeks. Fear receded, replaced by relief, feeling the girl's warmth. On deck, pirates surrendered, hands raised, faces twisted with fear, eyes desperate. The frigate took prisoners, its shadow covering the liner, air filling with diesel scent. Iton clapped Jack's shoulder, smile crooked, voice raspy. "We did more than we could," he said, offering a water flask, its cap clinking on metal. Jack nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun rose, promising a new day. The morning of was quiet, air filled with salt and freshly brewed coffee scents rising from the buffet. Pirates were gone, the frigate escorting the liner, its silhouette a guardian on the horizon. Jack lay in the infirmary, side wrapped in white bandages, skin itching from ointment, breath uneven. Sunlight filtered through the window, reflecting off metal walls, casting shadows on his face. "Bullet grazed you," the nurse said, voice soft as silk, hands moving with assurance. "A week and you'll forget, but rest or the wound will reopen." "Won't believe it's over till I see Emily," he replied, voice weak but firm, eyes searching for her silhouette at the door. The door creaked open, and Emily rushed in, face pale but eyes shining like stars. She hugged him, tears falling on his chest, leaving wet spots, breath warm. "You promised poolside cocktails," she sobbed, voice trembling with emotion, hands gripping his shoulders. "I thought I'd lose you, like that hospital day." "And you wanted a jacuzzi," he rasped, laughing, hand touching her salt-streaked hair. "Sorry I messed up the plan, but we're alive." They fell silent, hands clasped, breath sinking, fingers intertwining with warmth. Applause sounded outside, light footsteps approached, crew and passenger voices blending with whispers. Bellini entered, uniform wrinkled, but posture proud, eyes gleaming with pride. "Mr. Thompson, you saved many," he said, voice full of respect, hands clutching his cap. "Want a reward, or shall it stay between us?" "No need," Jack replied, eyes on Emily, whose smile fueled him. "Let them remember the deeds, not names. I did it for her, not medals." Samir rushed in with his mother, her sari torn but eyes radiant with gratitude, hands trembling with emotion. She hugged Emily, whispering in Arabic, voice quivering like leaves in wind. "She says you're an angel," Bellini translated, smile warm, voice gentle. Emily smiled through tears, squeezing Jack's hand, feeling his pulse. At the door, Alina flashed by, shoulder bandaged, face pale but resolute, eyes avoiding contact. She nodded to Jack and vanished down the corridor, steps rustling. "She did more than it seems," Emily whispered, voice brimming with admiration, heart swelling with gratitude. On April 27th, the cruise liner headed to Suez under frigate escort, its decks littered with battle remnants, shattered glass, bullet marks on railings, oil stains the wind smeared across boards. In the bridge, Bellini, with a mug of black tea, steam rising in a thin stream, wrote in the log, his pen scratching paper, leaving uneven lines from a slight hand tremor. Sunlight reflected off the window, flooding the room with gold, but couldn't dispel the exhaustion shadowing his face. He gazed at the sea beyond the glass, waves gently swaying, as if recalling the ordeal. April 25, 2009, pirate attack off Seychelles, he wrote, hand moving slowly, pausing after each word to recall details. Crew and passengers showed courage. No losses. Jack Thompson, example of resilience. Alina Storm, key to survival. He paused, gaze clouding as he remembered Alina silently neutralizing the threat, her sweat-streaked face lit by an emergency light. An officer from the frigate, a tall Spaniard with a chest medal gleaming in the sun, entered with a folder under his arm, steps resounding on the metal floor. "Mr. Thompson, you deserve a medal," he said, accent soft, almost musical, eyes respectful. "From the Spanish Navy for your bravery." "No need," Jack replied, sitting with a bandaged side, voice weak but steely despite rib pain. "Let it stay in memory, not on a ribbon. I did what I could, thinking of my family." His mind drifted to Emily and Laura, their faces from last night's fearful dreams. The officer nodded, gaze respectful, noting it in the folder before leaving a faint sea salt scent. Emily helped in the infirmary, serving mint tea, her smile returning though hands still shook, recalling Samir's cries. She exchanged quiet words with the nurse, whose fingers deftly changed bandages, voice soothing like post-storm calm. Levin's security team departed without fanfare, steps fading in corridors, leaving only the echo of their gear clinking in passengers' ears. Levin, with dark circles, cast a final glance at the liner, face impassive but eyes hinting pride for his team. He shook Bellini's hand, grip firm like a silent vow. That evening Bellini finished the log, pen moving slower, as if weighing each word. "We endured thanks to people stronger than fear." Alina left silently, but her name marks the liner's history. Her actions saved hundreds, and I saw her by the vent, hands trembling, gaze steely. He closed the log, eyes on the horizon shimmering with heat, allowing a faint smile for the first time in days. On deck, Jack and Emily watched the waves, hands entwined with new-found warmth. Salty wind tousled their hair, sea noise blending with the frigate's distant horn. "Tomorrow, a normal day," he said, voice quiet but hopeful, as if convincing himself. He recalled holding the radio, coordinating defense, and Emily bandaging wounds in the shelter, hands shaking but unyielding. "Main thing, together," she replied, smile warm as morning sun, eyes glistening with held-back tears. She leaned into him, feeling his warmth through the bandage, recalling Laura hugging her rabbit, whispering her name. They stood silent, listening to gulls crying over the water, breaths merging in a rhythm speaking louder than words. The dawn of May first bathed the Ligurian Sea in golden light, waves gently lapping against the hull of the MSC Melody, leaving foam along its sides. The liner entered the port of Genoa, greeted by pilot boats whose horns sounded like a welcome, echoing off the ancient walls. The silhouettes of buildings and cranes loomed on the shore, their outlines trembling in the morning mist, while the air filled with the scent of fish and freshly brewed coffee. Jack and Emily sat on the deck, their faces weary but happy, their hands entwined with warmth. The sun warmed their skin, the wind carrying the aroma of fish and coffee from the pier where fishermen were already unloading their catch. "History instead of cocktails," he said, his voice laced with gentle irony, his eyes twinkling with laughter. "And you're still my husband," she smiled, squeezing his hand, tears welling in her eyes. "We made it, Jack, despite everything." Passengers greeted each other, sharing food. Someone offered crusty bread that crunched in their hands. Another passed around cheese with its rich aroma. A man at the railing whispered a prayer, his voice trembling with relief, his fingers clutching rosary beads. Children drew the frigate with chalk on the deck, their laughter ringing like bells, the chalk leaving colorful traces. Samir hugged Emily, his mother, with shining eyes, saying, "Thank you for finding him. You're our family now, and I'll pray for you." Alina descended the gangway with the others, her shoulder bandaged, her uniform slightly wrinkled, but her posture calm. Jack approached her, his steps slow, a smile on his face. "No goodbyes?" he asked in a light tone. "I'm not one for long speeches," she replied with a smile, shaking his hand. "You did more than I expected. Good luck." They exchanged a handshake, her grip firm, and Alina walked on, blending into the crowd at the pier. On the bridge, Bellini finished writing in the log. Alina Storm left quietly. Her name tops the list of those who saved the liner. Passengers returned to life, and we to the sea, with new scars and hope. He closed the book, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun rose, promising peace. Passengers descended the gangways, their steps echoing on the metal, voices merging with the city's noise. Jack caught a glimpse of Victor near the bar, nervously pulling a worn packet from under the broken display before vanishing into the crowd. A boy carried a ship drawing. His mother held a dog on a leash, its fur damp with dew. Journalists waited on the pier, their cameras flashing like stars, questions raining down. Jack looked at Emily. "What now?" he asked, his voice full of spring-like hope. "Breakfast, sleep, jacuzzi," she replied, her laughter chiming like a bell, her eyes gleaming. "No pirates, I promise." "Just tea and jazz," he smiled, hugging her, their shadows merging on the deck. The liner's horn echoed over the harbor, its sound bouncing off Genoa's walls, heralding a new day full of promises.